You're listening to Inside the Village, where all news is local and no topic is off limits.
So help me, Bob, it's bully in the alley. Hey, bully in the alley. So help me, Bob.
Welcome to Inside the Village for the week of May 24th, 2023. I'm Scott Sexsmith. Michael Friscoletti, editor-in-chief, is here, as is executive producer Derek Turner. The long weekend is over. How was it?
It was too short, the long weekend.
It's funny, isn't it?
It is.
Even 3 days goes by quickly.
It is. And I'm not going to whine. I'm not complaining. But the news it doesn't rest for long weekends, right? Things still come up, and you're on your phone, you're checking things, you're talking to reporters who are working on the weekend, and I'm not complaining. I'm doing it for 25 years. I love the business. I love the job. But it's rare that you actually stop. I'm sure all the other editors who work at our local sites here would say the same thing.
Now, were you able to take some time for yourself and enjoy and get out?
Yeah, just more taking it easy, enjoying time with the family. And I do like it. It's so totally cliche, but I do like Victoria Day because you kind of feel, especially up where we are in the Soo, you finally start to feel like the nice weather is here. And there's you see some leaves coming on trees, and you actually see your neighbors. That's a phenomenon here too, right?
It is,
You do not see your neighbors for months at a time.
6 months.
You might wave at them once in a while, and they got their hoods up and their earmuffs on, and you might do a quick wave as someone's shoveling snow somewhere. But you don't. Then all of a sudden, there's that day, usually around Victoria Day, where you look out your window or go out in the driveway, and everybody's outside, and they're talking, and someone's got a new dog, and someone's still alive, and
that's what they say about me. Oh, look, he is still alive.
There's that guy. Yeah, well,
it was good. I got a couple of rounds of golf in and some yard work.
Yeah,
I came into work yesterday, and it felt like I had 20-pound dumbbells on my arms that I was dragging my knuckles.
From yard work?
Yeah.
What were you doing? Watching someone dig up your garden?
I was watching Kim do the work, and I should give her a shout out because she did 90% of it. Just raking and stuff. You're down digging stuff up and getting rid of dead stuff. And
so you found time in between 2 rounds of golf to do a bit of raking?
Plus watching the PGA Championship.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
As a full disclosure, we have a little golf pool going here at work. And
yes.
I'm a disaster.
Yeah,
the 1 week I picked John Ram to win the tournament, he starts the first round at +6.
That's so not like him. And I went the other way against better judgment. Swore I'd never pick a live guy, and I went with Brooks Koepka and he won.
Oh, he's a live guy. It shows you how little I know. Yeah.
3.1.
There's someone doing some construction down here or something.
They're you know what they're doing?
What?
They're I didn't want to tell you. They're constructing a dressing room for us.
For you, the green room.
We're going to have our very own green room. And
is that the green paint going on, or what's that noise?
They didn't get the note that an important show is being taken.
It's funny. People see it and they think it's so important. It looks so good and professional. It does. It's great down here. But right outside the door, there's often some crazy noise going on.
Yes. And we won't tell you what it is. All right. Let's get down to business. The first word to Frisco for this week of May 24th, 2023. A very powerful story coming out of Garden River First Nation.
Yeah, I think if some people would have seen this, the Canadian Press Wire Service wrote about it first. The Garden River First Nation members of the community, which is near Sault Ste. Marie, were down at Queen's Park announcing the launch of a lawsuit against the provincial and federal governments over the loss of a land that they allege was stolen from them. More powerful, I think, was the part of the story that James Hopkin, our reporter here at Sault Today, got into talking to them the day after. There is some old artifacts, 200-year-old pieces, including a pipe from the original chief at Garden River, that the Royal Ontario Museum eventually got their hands on. I'm not exactly sure how, but they have this pipe. And they're negotiating. This is what the story goes into. They're negotiating with the band to bring that stuff home, to bring it back to the First Nation.
Right.
And just listening to the voices of the people who were able to see these artifacts, including this pipe for the first time, how emotional it was and what it means to them to be able to bring it back. And I just thought it was also interesting, as someone who's not from Garden River, obviously, and seeing how this works, the fact that the museum is willing and able and wants to give this stuff back to them, and they're negotiating that, I think that the sticking point is how can they make sure that it goes somewhere where it's going to be safe and kept properly. This is a very historic artifact. So just a really interesting window into things that are going on that we wouldn't know of if we weren't telling these stories.
A wild story from our friends at the Trillium. Of course, we all know the province's plan to build 1.5 million new homes over the next 10 years. The problem is municipalities don't have enough city planners to plan the builds.
Yeah.
So how's it going to happen?
You know, it's funny, when I read this story, I thought about Bernard Landsberg in Thorold. He's our editor there. He's been writing a lot about how the city of Thorold basically has no planning department. Everyone's left, right? And I think that was a couple months ago that they were in that situation. And now you have the housing minister in Ontario talking about how we're desperate for planners. There's kind of a labor shortage everywhere, right? There's not enough skilled trades, for example. Well, there's not enough city planners. So on one side, you have the Ford government saying they're going to build, 1.5 million homes over the next decade. And then you have people in the industry saying, well, we don't have enough city planners. Toronto's saying they're short, for example, 60 planners out of 400. There's record numbers of job postings for these type of jobs, and they just don't have the people to do it. So it's always interesting to see how these things can come together when they don't have. We know about the labor shortage in the skilled trades, and now they're saying we don't have the people who know how to do the planning. So, it's fascinating how this stuff comes together. And so, yeah, the Trillium team was on that story, as they are with all things at Queen's Park.
All right, I know it's called the first word to Frisco, but I do want to mention one story that kind of stood out to me this week, and it comes from our great reporter Tyler Evans from Aurelia Matters on the story of Joe Bladdock. So Joe, in 2011, suffered a cardiac arrest while out for a walk with his mother-in-law and his mother. Somebody saw what was going on, called 911. He goes into cardiac arrest. Aurelia firefighters show up. Santos Guerrera was the firefighter's name. He administered CPR, brought him back. Joe was actually out for 15 minutes. Wow. I don't know if you're clinically declared dead at that point. I would think. I mean, wow. I'm not a doctor, but
15 minutes.
15 minutes. Brings him back. So fast forward 10 years later to a beautiful reunion between Joe and the firefighter that saved his life. Just a great story.
That's fantastic. And I say it every week, don't I? But that's local journalism right there, right? Who else is going to tell those beautiful stories? And Tyler's excellent at doing those kind of things. And it was a great read. I read that story as well, obviously. Fantastic piece.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a beautiful reunion story between a firefighter and a life saved. Okay, speaking of saving lives, doctor shortages across the province in communities big and small is big news, and we're going to talk about that today on the show.
It's a really important conversation we're going to have. I'm looking forward to it.
All right, we'll get into it next when Inside the Village returns right after this.
Reporters, editors, and journalists who go the extra mile to get the story and get it right. Go behind the scenes with those who cover the stories that matter most to you and your community. Look for it in the Village Features section of your favorite Village Media website across Ontario.
Back on Inside the Village with Michael Friscolanti, editor-in-chief here at Village Media. I'm Scott Sexsmith, joined on the program now by Tim Vine. Tim is the CEO of the North Shore Health Network, of course, covering regions such as Echo Bay, Spanish, St. Joe's Island, Blind River, and, of course, Thessalon. Tim, welcome to Inside the Village. It's great to have you here.
Thanks so much, Scott.
Tim, as we sit here right now, the ER department in Thessalon is closed. Can you tell us how we got to where we are today?
Yeah, absolutely. So as we know, the whole system has got a shortage of providers at the moment, and we were just not able to secure provider coverage. Either a physician or a nurse practitioner should be able to provide service in that location. As you noted, we've got 3 emergency departments, one on St. Joe's Island at the Matthews Memorial Site and one in Blind River, and of course the Thessalon site that is closed today. So, it's a challenge for a rural hospital like ours that has 3 locations, looking for 3 providers, 365 days a year to be able to provide 24/7 coverage. And it wasn't a decision that we took lightly or easily because, of course, it puts people at risk, and we're here to serve the public, and that's as simple as it is. We just couldn't find coverage by providers.
Mm-hmm. And we'll get into that, Tim. So just be clear. So the 3 hospitals, you try to have one doctor on at all times. Is that the goal?
That's right. Yeah, we can't operate the emergency department without a provider in place. So we to keep them open, we need a provider.
And have you had this trouble before? Have you ever had to close like this?
So I'm fairly new to the organization, and we've had lots of leadership changeover, which again is unfortunately not unique to the North Shore Health Network. But I understand at the beginning of COVID, so about 3 years ago, the Thessalon site was closed due to close contact by all the staff. But we had very low volumes at that time. So the impact on the community was probably a lot less than it is right now.
Let's talk about sort of the shuffling game that goes on. How are you making sure you have these positions filled on a day-to-day basis? Are you using locum doctors, out-of-town doctors? Do you have a local doctor? There are a few there.
I mean, it's an excellent question. Thessalon is our standout problem because we don't have local physicians. So there's 2 RMPGA contracts, which are family primary care contracts that also require service in our emergency department. So there's 2 in Thessalon and 2 in Blind River, and those physicians would normally provide a baseline of coverage that then would be rounded out by locums. But for about the last 2 years, we have been 100% dependent on locums for secondary care in the emergency department, as well as those primary care clinics. So that community has been without primary care for a couple of years, and this sort of knock-on effect in our ability to staff and keep open our emergency department.
Tim, I know that you're expected to reopen Thessalon, I believe, Friday morning at 8 a.m., and I also know that you don't have a crystal ball, but is this a problem or service interruption that you think could very well continue to repeat itself moving forward?
Regrettably, Scott, yes, I see that very much being the case, especially over the summer. One of the big things, and I'm sure we'll get into it a little bit more, but there was a program that helped out rural emergency departments called the CTSLPE, which is an alphabet soup. In healthcare, we love our initialisms, and I will butcher if I tell you what it all stands for, but essentially it was this, a top up for summer locums, and it initiated as a summer program and then got extended. Come the new fiscal year, on April 1st, that program wasn't continued. And so our physicians that we're trying to recruit to a place like Thessalon are now being paid about a third of what they were being paid before, which makes it really difficult when their home hospitals are stretched. And if they're making their living traveling, coming to an area that is even as remote as Blind River is a challenge for that to make financial sense for them, especially when there's greater need in areas that are more accessible. And our local physician groups are starting to feel the effects of trying to keep our operations going, both in our acute care unit and our emergency departments that have local docs in Blind River and on St. Joe's Island. And, they're looking for summer holidays like everybody else. And I think that we've built a system that kind of relies too much on the goodwill of providers to step in at the expense of their personal lives and their own health to prop up the system. And we're at this moment that a lot of providers are starting to pull back and saying that, very understandably, I can't give everything. I can't be all things to all people at all times.
That makes sense. You hear from doctors all over the country who are feeling the same sense of burnout. Obviously, in Northern Ontario, this is an issue we've heard about for a long time, where there's lots of smaller communities in the north that struggle with doctor recruitment, that struggle with doctor shortages. You must speak to lots of other people in the industry, so to speak, and other people in the healthcare world who are dealing with the same thing you are. What do they say to you, and what are some of the possible solutions long-term that we could put in place?
Long-term solutions are almost in a way the easiest, because there are some moves happening. Like I think of the Northern Ontario School of Medicine. They've increased their enrollment, which is great. And I think it needs to increase more. And we need to focus on, I use the word provider advisedly, because it's not just physicians we're talking about. We need to understand how we can leverage nurse practitioners and physicians' assistants to be used more strategically in the delivery of care. And so, having expansion of those programs, I think, is a great thing to grow the pipeline. We've got a fundamental labor market imbalance. We've got too many positions and not enough people with the skills. So, but we know it takes, 6 years to train a doctor, 4 years for a nurse practitioner, 4 years for a PA, a physician's assistant. So, the help might be coming, and we can quibble about whether universities are letting enough people into these programs, but a lot of them are letting in more. And I think NOSM needs to be funded adequately to allow even more providers to be trained, especially from the north. In the north, we know that we've got a a better chance of retaining those people locally if they've got ties here. Not that, I mean, I'm a Southerner, where I think we're always willing to let people come up and help out in the north, but certainly for the long-term stability of our provider population, it would be better to train more people here in the north. And then, there are some medium and short-term things that I'm sure we'll talk about as well.
Tim, you're the CEO, and as the expression goes, the buck stops with you. Let me ask you: are people angry with you? What are you hearing from the community? So
far, there's disappointment. I think that a lot of people recognize that the public hospital system is extremely fragile right now, and myself, my board, members of the senior leadership team have tried to engage with the community and with leaders to make them aware of the challenges. So when I called the mayor of Thessalon to advise him of the closure, he was certainly disappointed, but understood. We had prepared him for this eventuality. And I think that that's what we need to do as service providers, because we are there for the communities. We need to be open and honest about our challenges with them. And the first thing that Bill Rosenberg, who's the mayor there, asked me is, what can I do to help? And that's exactly the response that we want from our municipal partners. And the answer, unfortunately, usually is advocacy. Continuing to lobby at Roma and AMO and those types of municipal fora for robust funding, because we are an amenity in that community. If we don't have an emergency department, economic development becomes more challenging, becomes less desirable for people to live there.
So practically speaking, God forbid, if someone gets in a horrible accident in Thessalon while this department is closed, what are their options? The Sioux is the closest one, or where do they go?
So our location in Blind River and Richards Landing Matthews Memorial are open. So we have geographically two other emergency departments operated by the North Shore Health Network that are about 30, 40 minutes away, depending on how fast you drive. But anybody who is experiencing an emergency can call 911, can be picked up by an ambulance, and the EMS team then routes them to the most appropriate closest hospital for whatever they might be suffering from.
Okay. So we talked about some of the longer term solutions. What are some of the medium and short term? I mean, does it come down to dollars and cents? Is it about giving better pay to doctors to recruit them to Northern Ontario communities like yours? What are some answers?
So the medium term is, and I know this has started to roll already. There's been some discussions around it, but we need to break open those RMPGA contracts, those rural northern provider contracts that are the basis of small rural healthcare. And what that means is you've got two physicians in Thessalon that would be on the RMPGA contract that requires them essentially to be all things at all times to all people. They do soup to nuts medicine. And that's not realistic anymore. That's not realistic for young providers who want work-life balance, spend time with their family, who are not willing to sacrifice their health and their home life in order to provide that, prenatal care to palliative care in those communities. So we need to break open those contracts, and we need to, at the same time that we're doing that, look at physician complement in communities. 40 years ago, when these contracts were made, two physicians in a community might have been okay. We've now got such complex chronic disease that's happening, and we have so many more treatments and diagnostics that we put patients through that it's too much to manage for just two physicians. So we need more physicians, and we need to treat them in a way that supports their health and sustainability.
Mm-hmm. Is there one or two things in particular when you speak to a potential recruit of a doctor to come to your community? What are the main things they say that's the clincher for them not to come?
RMPGA contracts are one of them.
Mm-hmm.
You've got providers coming out of med school, in their late 20s, sometimes in their early 30s, if they've done something else before they've gone. They're at their prime, child, family creation time. And both for men and women now, it is a social expectation. I have a 7-month-old.
Mm-hmm.
I roll home and I get my little boy and I'm in charge because my wife is a homemaker and she's looking after him during the day. We've got shared parenting, which wasn't the case to the same extent 40 years ago. So you've got people wanting to participate in their children's lives, and to be on 1 and 2 call in a community is just not sustainable, and it's not something that they're interested in. I think that rural places provide a lot of incentives for doctors, around the ability to be really integrated into a community if they want to be, to have that really immediate impact on people, to see it generationally. We've got beautiful places to live across the North Shore. You can get a very reasonably affordable home on a lake here, and have all your friends come and visit. So there are things that are attractive, but I think it's mostly the way that we set up the work for the physicians that makes it difficult.
I guess that the thing for me too is, if you could have the ear of the health minister, which you may have had in the past, if you could speak to the health minister for 10 minutes today, what would you say?
So I would, the three things I'm telling anybody that will listen is, we need to immediately restore the summer locum program to provide that short term, and that is money. Unfortunately, it is just an issue of money, and we need that immediately in order to provide coverage. The second thing is, exactly as I said, in the medium term, we need to revise these contracts, and not just RMPGAs, but FOs. We need to really look at what our physician complement is in small rural communities and what the needs are. And then the third thing is, continue to support the expansion of provider education. That's going to solve the problem in the long term. We need to, I think we need to run the risk of overproducing providers at this point. Whereas in the past we've actually underproduced them. There was a reduction in medical school enrollments about 10 or 15 years ago, and we're kind of reaping the harvest of those seeds now.
Tim, I guess the logical follow-up to that, when you say to anyone who will listen, is anyone listening? Who is listening, and what are they doing to help your cause?
Well, so I want to cheekily say, of course, nobody's listening, because I'm an insignificant hospital CEO in Northern Ontario. But, people, the reality is people are, because it's not just us. It's other rural hospitals, and increasingly it's starting to be urban ones as well. Maybe not your university health networks. They've got different challenges. Everybody in the sector has a challenge. They have different ones, but the smaller centers, the Peterboroughs, and those kind of medium-sized cities, they are also having issues in very similar ways. I was just at an Ontario Hospital Association leadership summit a couple of weeks ago in Toronto, and got to talk with a lot of my colleagues from across the north and across the province. And a lot of similarities. So the Ontario Hospital Association is listening. I want to give credit where credit is due. I think Ontario Health is trying to listen. I think the Ministry of Health is trying to listen, but it's an $85 billion organization. It's hard to steer that ship. And we need nimble and agile action. We need decisive action. And, I think that the political will needs to be there a little bit more at the moment. We have good allies in government, in the ministry, in Ontario Health, that are listening and trying to advance. We just need help faster than maybe they can bring it to us.
I hear what you're saying, Tim. I guess I'm like you. I'm from the South originally. I've lived in the Sioux for about 20 years. And sometimes I just wonder if this is just what you get for living in a place, like you said, a beautiful, more rural place where you can buy a house on the water. You're not going to have the University Health Network down the street. You're not going to have Mount Sinai Hospital, for example. Is this one of those issues where maybe it can get a little better, but the reality is, if you live in a small town, you're going to have small town hospital issues?
I think we're always going to have small town hospital issues. And I think that's part of it too. We have to create expectations. We've seen a big flood of people come to Northern Ontario because of many of those factors that you said through the pandemic. And they've stayed and they've integrated well into the community. But I think some of them have, larger urban center expectations. But I think at the end of the day, no Ontarian deserves to have emergency services shut on and off like we're having to do in Thessalon. I think that, there's a minimal level of service that we can all reasonably expect as citizens and taxpayers of this province and this country, and we're not hitting it. And that's an issue that I want to try and solve, and I want to work collaboratively. I think there's a lot of stuff that's out of a lot of people's control, and everybody is trying. I can't say, I can't point fingers and say, the government doesn't want to solve this issue, because they do. Of course they do. And they are trying to do that. I can't point fingers and say the ministry is not, wanting to solve this problem. They are. But healthcare is a wicked problem, especially right now. And it has no clear good solutions. And if it had clear good solutions, we would have solved it a long time ago. We've kicked a lot of stuff down a lot of stuff down the road, and now we're at it again. And we've got it, a moment, I hope, to create some generational fixes with the new money coming from the federal government, with some more creativity and a realignment with the Ontario health teams to create more local accountability and integration. I think there's a lot that we can do, but there's a lot that we've got to go through first before we can start to realize those benefits. And I think you're right, Mike. It's going to be not amazing for a little while yet, unfortunately.
That's a great point. I appreciate that. I guess I have to ask you too. I wonder, like, as the CEO, how worried are you when the hospitals close down for 48 hours? I mean, do you stay up at night, or you must be waiting to breathe a sigh of relief Friday morning at 8 o'clock?
I absolutely am. I'm not a hospital CEO because I wanted the money or the prestige. I started my career in private equity in Toronto. I wanted to make an impact on my community. And I am unbelievably blessed to be able to do that. And it pains me when we have to deny service because we have no other option. That's not what I'm here for. That's not what our nurses are here for. That's not what our local physicians are here for. And, God forbid, as you said, if something happens to somebody, that's a moral injury that we will carry with us, that we weren't able to help that person because we had to close down our service. It is a very heavy thing. Nobody has undertaken this lightly, and nobody is pleased about the prospect of other closures, not just in Thessalon, but in our other 2 locations over the balance of the summer.
Tim Vine, CEO of the North Shore Health Network. Tim, we know that your plate is full and your time is precious, and we thank you and best of luck with this situation.
Thanks so much, and thanks for giving me an opportunity to share my solutions with more people, and hopefully we can start to move towards stabilizing and improving the system.
For the latest in in-depth features and enterprise journalism from your local writers at Village Media, be sure to check out The Big Read. The Big Read. It's the full story behind the headlines. Look for The Big Read on your favorite Village Media website across Ontario.
Back to wrap on Inside the Village. I love some of the conversations. I love all the conversations, but a meaningful one like that with a guy like Tim who, provides some clarity some of our viewers or listeners don't fully understand.
I agree. I think often you see a headline and you read a story and it can be a really well-reported piece. But to actually hear a conversation or have a conversation like that, it sort of takes it a little deeper, right? I mean, if you're up in Northern Ontario, you've read the headlines about this emergency room closing. It's big news. It's a small town in Northern Ontario in a region of the country, the region of the province that is struggling mightily with doctor shortages and trying to figure out that issue. We now have a case of an emergency room being forced to close for 48 hours. It's been in the news. And here we get to talk to Tim, the CEO, and really kind of dive deep into why it's happening, how they tried to prevent it. And it's those kind of conversations that we're having here on Inside the Village, which are really impactful to me. I think it takes the story to a whole new level.
It does. And a guy like Tim is the last guy that wants to see one of his emergency rooms have to shutter because of a shortage.
Yeah, and I don't want to be this guy that jinxes things, but just imagine, like, if you're in Thessalon right now, like the doors are locked to the emergency room for 48 hours, right? You just keep your fingers crossed and hope that nothing bad happens, right? Because if he put it rightly, if something did happen, and sadly, to be this guy again, it almost takes something terrible like that to happen for people to kick into action and for people to say, look, we finally have to solve this, right? I mean, you don't want that to happen, that somebody is badly hurt and has nowhere to go if they're living, but sometimes that's what happens. But I'm going to knock on wood because I don't want that to happen.
No, and I listened to a guy like Tim who, admittedly said, a young family, he's got a 7-month-old son. What happens to that family? God forbid there's a tragedy. The emergency room is closed. People are tired of hearing that, discussions are happening, conversations are being had. To them, it's all political rhetoric. They want action and they want it now.
For sure. I think he's right because he takes you behind the scenes in a sense that he's talking to bureaucrats in the health ministry, right, who are working hard, who are trying to figure it. They're not just punching in and punching out. No. There are obviously people that are well beyond the headlines that we don't hear about, don't know about. They're doing work to try to deal with that. And I just think, like, how much we take it for granted, right? I often joke about, or often speak about how we take journalism for granted. You don't need to think every day about, look at this great journalism going on here, but you just expect when you log on to our site every morning, one of our sites, it's there, and the reporters and the editors are doing good work. It's the same as a hospital. When your kid's not feeling well at 4 a.m. and you show up in the emergency room, you just expect someone to be there to register you and get you taken care of. And the thought that in that community they don't have that right now is wild.
You don't expect there to be a padlock on the door when, at 4 a.m. your kid's sick. I think you said it best during the commercial break. We could do the show every week and talk some facet of healthcare and issues. It just seems to be always prominent.
I think so.
All right, Inside the Village. You can get all back episodes at insidethevillage.ca, of course, across the Village Media Network and wherever you get your favorite podcasts. And reach out. People are doing it now in droves. Lots of people with opinions on previous shows. So be a part of it. ITV at villagemedia.ca. For Derek Turner, executive producer here at Inside the Village, Michael Friscolanti, editor-in-chief at Village Media, I'm Scott Sexsmith. We will talk to you next week.
You've been listening to Inside the Village.
Frisco and Scott's Wardrobe, provided in part by Moores, Sault Ste. Marie.